Hello, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Mary, and today's video is going to be tips and tricks to help you meet your New Year's resolution of reading more books in 2022. So it's the new year, Happy New Year. A lot of people at the beginning of the year will set their goals, will set resolutions, and I know for a lot of people, especially if you found your way to this video, one of your goals is to read more this year. And I know it can be challenging. So I wanted to give you a few of my best tips and tricks from when I made a New Year's resolution to read more back in 2019. Back in 2019, I made a New Year's resolution to read more because I got back into reading at the end of 2018, and now I read over 100 books a year. But not everyone can read over 100 books a year. It depends on your reading speed, the time you dedicate to reading, and also the types of books you read, I think. So we're going to go through all of that, hopefully in a quick and snappy manner, but I just wanted to give you a quick background and introduction into my reading journey. So when I was a kid, I loved to read. I read all the time. In high school, I started reading less because I had to read more for class, and I just wasn't finding it as enjoyable anymore. And then in college, I pretty much fell off reading entirely unless I was on like summer vacation. So I wasn't reading at all. I graduated college in 2017 and started working in January of 2018, and I was bored pretty much all the time. All I was doing was working and watching TV, and I just wasn't having a good time. So my mom, who's always been kind of an avid reader, she reads about 1 to 2 books a month. And I was always so jealous of the fact that she could just sit down and read, and she really got a lot out of it. She had a book club that she was in, and she started recommending me some books. So I started reading again at the end of 2018. And by 2019, I decided I want to make reading a part of my life again. So I set a goal to read 1 book a week, which was kind of a lot. And I ended up, I think, making it to 37 books that year. And part of the reason I didn't hit my goal is because, 1, I was just getting back into reading, and 2, I wasn't picking books that were going to be fast reads. And so I want to sort of clarify a few things. A lot of people will set their Goodreads goal at a certain amount, and then they will, at the end of the year, scramble to read a bunch of short books or graphic novels or comics to meet that goal because they're not there yet. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with reading comics or graphic novels or reading shorter books, any of that, reading fluffy books like romance. There's nothing wrong with any of that, but if it's not what you want to read, it's not really accomplishing your goal. So personally, I do set a Goodreads goal, but it's more just to see how much I'm reading. So a couple of things that I will say, if you've set your Goodreads goal at 52 books, like I did my first time, or even 100 books, or honestly, even 12 books, 1 book a month, whatever you've set your goal at, don't put so much pressure on meeting that goal that you're reading things you're not interested in, because then you're just going to hate the process. My first tip is not to place an overly ambitious goal. If you're a person who reads like 2 books a year, probably setting your goal at 100 books is not going to serve you very well. Work on setting a goal that's going to be achievable for you, and the way you can figure out what is achievable for you is by knowing your tastes and knowing your reading speed. If you don't know either of these things, maybe it's best to set a goal to read more than you did last year, so there's not as much pressure to read 50 books in a year if you only read 3 books last year, if that makes sense. I would also say, if you really are serious about hitting a goal and reading more and making reading a part of your life, you've got to actually make it a part of your life. So setting routines for me is crucial. Some people like to wake up earlier and they read in bed for a little bit. Something that I think is really helpful is just reading a book at night before you go to bed, because you're supposed to be screen free and you can be that way. And if you read just a chapter a night, you're going to get through a book, or just 30 minutes a night. Anything like that, if you can find time in your day to read, maybe you have a lunch break and you bring your lunch to work and otherwise you would just be on social media, you can read. But also, don't put so much pressure on yourself that you don't want to read. One of the best ways to ruin a New Year's resolution is by putting so much pressure on it that it's not fun anymore. I think personally reading is a hobby for me, so reading should always be enjoyable. If you're not having a good time, like, what is the point to doing it? I fully subscribe to the viewpoint that you exist to have a good time, you know? There are things that you have to do. Probably reading books is not one of them, or you would be doing it already. So if it's not enjoyable for you, maybe it's not the time. I do think that reading taste has a lot to do with it. Some people I know who love to read read like 12 books a year, but they only read prize list books because that's what they're interested in. Personally, I am not always a fan of shortlist books, like literature. I like genre fiction a lot of the time. So sort of figure out what your niche is. One way you can do this is by watching other YouTube videos on the topic. There are tons of book recommendation videos and tons of YouTube channels dedicated to books. I will say a lot of the bigger channels, in my experience, have been dedicated to like YA and YA fantasy and just fantasy in general. So if that's not your thing, you're going to have to do a deeper dive to search for other types of books that are represented. But it's totally worth it if it's something that you like. I will link a few of my favorite booktubers in different genres down below. I follow several people who mostly read romance. I follow several people who mostly read thrillers. And honestly, thrillers and romance have a lot of carryover. Like a lot of the YouTubers that I would recommend for thrillers also have really good romance recommendations, which is something that I think is interesting. But based on your tastes, you will want to go for certain things. Another thing I will say that helps but might not help everyone is listening to audiobooks. So I'm a person who can listen to audiobooks and I have a really easy time. I'm an auditory learner, so listening to something, I absorb it. If you don't absorb it, then maybe audiobooks aren't the way to go. But if you like podcasts and stuff, I think listening to an audiobook might help you, especially if you have a long commute or you are using your headphones a majority of the time. But again, I know that audiobooks are not for everyone, just like ebooks are not for everyone, although I do find it helpful to have ebooks. I use some apps from my library. I use Libby, I use Overdrive, and I use Cloud Library. They're all free from my library's website. So if you are a member of your public library, which if you're not, you should be, that's another tip. If you're not a member of your public library, you definitely should try to get a membership. If you're in the States, at least, I don't know how it works in other countries, but in the United States, it's free. You get a library card. You just have to show that you either work in the area or live in the area. Very easy to get. And once you have that, you not only have access to their physical collections, but you have access to their audiobooks and ebook collections, their digital collections. And so I highly recommend getting memberships to that because buying books is really expensive. And I personally think that it's a separate hobby from reading because not everyone has the space for a ton of books on their shelves. Like I personally don't, I've like maxed out my shelves at this point. So, and not everyone has the space to add more bookshelves. So that's something that I would recommend is the library, not only because you can rent a book and give it back, but because they have apps that you can use on your phone for ebooks and audiobooks. And that's one of the ways that I get the most reading done. That's how I get access to a lot of books. And that's what's worked for me. Another recommendation that I have is going back to looking at YouTube recommendations. People recommend books on this platform based on all kinds of things. So there are people who have recommended books based on songs you might like, albums you might like, movies you might like, TV shows you might like, as well as other books that you might have already read. So I would recommend scouring some recommendations. Also, this time of year is great because a lot of people either have just posted or are about to post their top books of the year. And so you can go through some of those lists and see if there's anything that sounds interesting to you. Another thing that I will recommend is if you find a book that you read based on a recommendation from someone, listen to other recommendations that they have because you might have more similar tastes. So not every book is going to suit every reader, but that's something that I've really found. I found a couple of booktubers who have very similar tastes in certain genres to myself, and that's been really helpful to finding other things that I think I might like. And this might seem really obvious, but when you're looking for books that you might like, read the description of the book, and if it sounds interesting, pick the book up. If it doesn't sound interesting, don't pick the book up. That's a problem that I had for a long time is I would be recommended books from like book lists, Time's Best Books of the Year, stuff like that. And I would want to read those books because other people really enjoyed them. But if I had just read the description, I would know that it's not something that's going to interest me. So it comes down to knowing yourself. But if you haven't read enough to know yourself, you sort of got to branch out and try different things. I myself have some recommendation videos. If you want to check those out, I'll link a few in the description box down below. But a lot of people have them, so you don't have to rely on like my recommendations, obviously, because again, we might not have similar tastes, which is totally fine. So those are my top tips for trying to read more and actually meeting your New Year's resolution goal. Keep in mind, if you don't read for 2 weeks, it's fine. I'm definitely the type of person who, if I fall off of doing something, whether it's reading, working out, sort of anything that I've set a goal to, eating healthy, if I fall off of that, it's really hard for me to get back onto that because it's like I've ruined it, so why try? But that's really not true. If you don't read for 2 weeks, you don't read for a month, you can still pick up a book again and try over. You can still pick up another book and start over on your goal to read more. And I really do think that reading is broadened my horizons so much. It's made me a more well-rounded and interesting person. For me, it has been really impactful for my life in the way that I see things, and also for just building empathy with other people and stories that I'm not familiar with. So I recommend checking out your local library's resources, checking out some booktubers that I'm going to have linked down below, and good luck on your reading journey. Thank you so much for watching this video. Hopefully it's not too long. I don't think it's going to be very long, but let me know in the comments down below if you are trying to read more in the new year and what your reading goal is. Also, let me know if you have another goal that's unrelated to reading, or anything else that you would like to share with me. I would love to hear it. I do post 2 videos every single week, so you can subscribe to my channel if you would like to. I post videos about books and bookish content primarily, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!